Good morning, everyone. If you are following us on Twitter and wish to make comments, the hashtag is YDOD 2014. That's YDOD 2014, and I hope you will comment throughout the day. So again, my name is Susan Gibbons, and I am the University Librarian, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you, those of you who are here physically in the room, and I know that we have many of you who are joining us online, and we appreciate that you are able to join us today. This is the second Yale Day of Data, and this emerged as a result of a workshop that 3 members of the Yale community participated in. Ed Karras from University IT, Michelle Hudson, who you just saw, and Jill Parchek from the library. They attended a National eScience Institute, and as a part of that institute's workshop, they were asked to go around campus and interview faculty and interview administrators about questions around data. And one of their findings was that there was a disconnect, let's say, between the two. That on the one hand, administration thought that faculty and scientists were quite satisfied with how they are handling their data. And on the side of the scientists and the faculty, there was a sense of there could be more services, there could be more assistance, more help in that area, and we wish that Yale would provide it. So we decided to put together this conference with the help of all of our partners because we wanted to start a dialogue on campus. We wanted to bring attention to the importance of data. We've always been using data, but the role of it now has increased. The scope, the scale, the complexity has gotten much deeper. And we hope now that we can see that there's truly a community of users on campus, and perhaps collectively together we can solve some of the problems that we're currently facing, whether it's a tsunami of data, a tidal wave, or whatever, however terminology we'd like to use. So I'm very glad to say that our Day of Data will be begun with our keynote speaker, Ben Polak, who is our university provost. He's also the William Brainard Professor of Economics, and I wish to thank him personally for joining us again in the second year and kicking off our Day of Data. Ben.
So thanks everyone for being here, and thank you, Susan, especially for your leadership here, and Len and others for helping organize this and working so hard on this. I'm very pleased that the Provost Office is co-sponsoring this event. This is, as Susan said, the second annual Day of Data, and the response to this has been tremendous. 120 people registered to attend the event, and the demand was so great there's another 160 people on the wait list, which I think probably indicates just how much interest there is in data around campus. And as Susan said, the events are being live streamed. I have to say, I've never been on Twitter before. I don't know what that means. I'm a little bit intimidated by that. Shows what a fuddy-duddy I am. As we did last year, there's going to be a bunch of Yale faculty presenting talks about their sort of data-intensive research and talking about how they navigate the problems, the challenges associated with curating and stewarding data. Yale's had some exciting developments in this area in the past year, one of which I mentioned actually last year, which is the new Census Research Data Center, and the leading force behind that, Pete Schott, will be presenting later on in the day. I'm pretty excited to see that getting up and running because it's been a long history going back to my time as chair of economics trying to get that to happen, and it is now happening. We're also going to be talking about the Yale Open Data Access Project at the School of Medicine. I wanted just to talk a little bit about how important data is becoming in research. Data is changing the way in which not only we do research, but the way in which we approach research in general. And this is fairly well understood in the sciences and the social sciences, I think, at this point. I mean, big data has become a bit of a cliche. In fact, sometimes I don't quite know what the border is between big data and small data, but I mean, we all understand that's important. We understand university-wide at Yale that things like computational biology and biostats are incredibly important in the future of what we do in the life sciences. But it goes beyond that. So I'm giving an example from the law school, which is a possibly apocryphal story. There was a lecture here maybe 18 months ago, a highly empirical, highly data-intensive lecture in the law school. And as people were going out, one of the slightly more I'm being live streamed, so I probably shouldn't say it, but let me say it anyway, slightly more fuddy-duddy law school professors complained to the person he was walking out with, it was a he, I'm not giving away too much there, that this talk had asked no new questions. This very empirical talk had asked no new questions. And this was meant to be a criticism. And the reply he got was, yeah, it didn't answer any new questions, but it answered a bunch of old questions. And that surely is the point, that there are things we can do with data. We can ask new questions with data, but we can also, for the first time, answer questions that have been speculated about for decades. We're learning in the humanities and the social sciences that things that we used to answer with anecdotes look very different when we apply data, and in fact the things we thought were the answers turn out to be wrong. So these questions about how to handle big data that are well known in the sciences, little known in the social sciences, are going to affect all of us. And we're seeing this right across campus, extending, I mentioned to the law school, but to the digital humanities projects as well, that Susan has been a big leader in. They do raise new problems, and we'll have time to talk about some of those problems today. The first day of data was primarily about internal collaborations at Yale, the way that people here at Yale are addressing cross-disciplinary challenges of working with data. And this year, we're expanding this view to look at collaborations that extend beyond Yale, collaborations within and with industry, government, and other academic institutions. We have a number of people visiting today from other institutions in Connecticut and beyond, and a warm welcome to all of you. We also have two visiting speakers joining us. Philip Bourne is the Associate Director for Data Science at the National Institute of Health, and he will talk about initiatives at the institutional, state, and federal levels. And Cathy O Neil is Director of the LEAD program at the Columbia School of Journalism, and she recently wrote the very popular book, Doing Data Science. She will address the cultural aspects of data, which has different meanings for different people. Today's program reflects the year that 2014 has been the year of big data, not only in universities, but in the public sector as well. The rising awareness of the issues surrounding data policy have been very much in evidence here on campus. And at the institutional level, we're responding to this in a number of ways, in particular with various advisory committees meeting right now to look at some of the key questions to address. At a recent conference of provosts I was at a couple of weeks ago, I'm finding that similar committees are forming right across the country. There are new regulatory issues to worry about. There are issues about the new compliance we have to do with data coming from public funding agencies for research. So I'm very pleased that this is not a one-off event, but the start of a series of programs involving Yale faculty, postdocs, and students that will continue throughout the year, and we hope that this Day of Data is going to be an annual event. I'm very grateful for you being here today, and I encourage all of you to be involved in the year ahead. I don't want to hog the floor here, so I think what I'm going to do here is stop and allow people to ask questions, either of me or of Len or of Susan, but I might first just ask Len and Susan if they have any comments they want to add.
All right, so I think I want to focus my comments on what some people might be wondering is why exactly is the library involved in data, and why is the library pushing this question? Because in many ways, the traditional view of libraries is the physical book, and yet here we are co-sponsoring an event on data. And the answer to that question is a shift that we're seeing very much within the library world, which is libraries moving beyond just the care of the physical collections and moving upstream in many ways in the research process. So traditionally, libraries were involved in collecting the end result of research, which was often in the form of a book or a journal article, and bringing that to a campus so that others could build upon that knowledge. What we're seeing now, though, is that the same skills that librarians have been applying to that process can now be applied to the research much sooner. An example being, as you go out for your grants, you're often being asked, and you will increasingly be asked, to create a data management plan to submit with that grant. That plan will ask you, how are you going to store your data? How are you going to arrange it? How are you going to curate it, preserve it? How are you going to make sure others who need access to it can identify it, find it, and use it? That is what libraries do. We have been curating and collecting and preserving and helping people discover and gain access to information all along. Now we can start to help doing it in a very different realm, which is with data. But in order for this to happen, I think the librarians need to be involved earlier in the process, almost as soon as the grant writing happens. And we now have on our staff 2 data librarians who are available to work with you to create that data management plan, so that when you're ready to submit, you have some guidance on how to do that. And we don't work within a vacuum. We are working with other data librarians across the country who are familiar with the requirements and the growing requirements of those federal funding agencies. So as you can see, it's the same skills we've had all along, but we're trying to apply them now in a very different way to help all of you in your research. And I hope you will, through this conference and through conversations with us, start to see the role that the library can play with you. And we welcome being one of your collaborators. We welcome being someone who can join you in this process. And it'll be our job to sort of bring to that conversation an understanding of the resources that are available to you from Yale, whether from University ITS, from high performance computing, from the other institutes and centers. And perhaps we can be that networking function. Perhaps we can be that node on campus that is aware of what others are doing, and to say that what you're trying to accomplish has similarities, has patterns that we see in other research that's going on, and we can perhaps be the ones to help you come together and think about collaboration in ways that you might not be aware of because it's so difficult to move across the silos of the university. So libraries support the entire university, and we move across all disciplines. So to leverage that cross-disciplinary nature of the libraries for the support of your own research, to help to find those colleagues, those who can help you. And we can hopefully also build a community of practice. The intellectual powerhouse of Yale is incredible. And as you struggle with your questions, your methodologies, or even how to store my data and how to do it in different ways, again, perhaps the library can be that source that will help you find others who can think about the problem with you, that we can be the collaborators and the glue that brings it all together. So I wanted to take that opportunity to make that pitch because it is a very different way of thinking about libraries, but it's one that we are now well positioned to serve that role. We're ready to hang out our shingle and say, come to us with your data questions. And I hope you'll take that as an invitation to contact us. And now I'll turn it over to Len.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Everybody seems kind of quiet. That's okay. First of all, thank you to all the organizers who put this day together. It really is a fantastic event on campus, and it probably is the thing that's going to be the catalyst to really move us forward. Because at the end of the day, when you think about what it's going to really take to move things forward, it's people. So I'm sure, you know, the CIO is here in front of the room, and probably the thing you're kind of wondering is, what great technology am I going to talk about? And I would love to do that, but I don't think this is necessarily the forum to get into all the details. Suffice it to say, there's a fair amount of things going on within IT that are very exciting, particularly in the area of high-performance computing. We've been expanding our capability in that space. I'm very pleased to announce that in partnership with faculty on campus, we've received our second NSF grant for cyber infrastructure. Our first grant was approximately $500,000 to implement a science network, a very high-speed network, 100 gigabit network that connects our major labs on campus to our high-performance computing clusters. That's very exciting. And our recent grant is approximately $800,000, again awarded through the NSF. And that's going to allow us to put some new technology in that's going to increase the efficiency of the network. It's a technology called software-defined networking, and we're working very closely with the computer science department on the implementation of that technology. So we're going to continue to build out infrastructure. We're growing in other spaces as well. We're growing in the space of security and privacy. So as we think about some of the high-performance computing, continuing to work in areas like genomics and bioinformatics, we're actually looking at ways that we can put in high-performance computing capability that's HIPAA compliant, so we can deal with the privacy issues and the regulatory issues we have around data. So you'll continue to hear more and more and more about those things. I was asked actually to respond to some of the comments Ben was talking about. So first of all, don't let the man fool you. He's not a fuddy-duddy. He's a very highly sophisticated technology user. I know it firsthand. And he's very much like many other faculty and researchers on campus that have great demands of technology. One of the things that Ben did say is this notion of answering old questions and answering new questions. And I wanted to respond to that by saying sometimes we don't even know what the new question is. And the capability we now have with big data, conceptually, we're starting to look into areas where we're looking at predictive modeling of big data sets. We're looking at prescriptive analytics, data that can start to find new discoveries and answer the questions before you know what the question actually is. So we continue to do that. We're looking at ways to implement technology like data visualization. Clearly, you know, big data is a very popular term, and I often ask people what they think big data actually is. But to me, it's just simply it's something that just takes too long to process. If you can't move it, store it, process it, manage it, preserve it, it's probably too big. And that's the problem. Sometimes we have data that's too big. And it is an arms race. We continue to try and grow our infrastructure to deal with it. But I think the real challenge is going to be how we think about using the data, what capabilities do we have, and what new technologies can we implement. So IT continues to grow and evolve. In the last several years, we've been building a stronger unit within the organization. We're currently searching for Senior Director of Research Technology, and the exciting thing about that position is that we're partnering with the Provost Office and the Deputy Dean of Medicine, and what we're doing there is imagining the creation of a Center for Research Computing on campus, something that didn't exist before. And why is this so important? I think it's important because, you know, again, at the top of the pyramid, how we get at solving some of these problems is really about people and putting the right people in place to start to work together and build communities across campus. There's lots of benefits of bringing various disciplines together to solve common problems, whether they're common algorithms, common programs that they can share, or just have a place to go and communicate and work with their colleagues on some of the things that they're trying to solve. So I'm really excited about some of the changes going on in IT, really excited about the partnerships that we're building on campus, and I'm really excited that about this collaboration that's been formed between ITS, the library, and other institutes on campus to start to focus on some of the big challenges around data. So again, thank you for having me here today. And any questions?
So any questions for any of the three of us? Cathy?
Yeah, I have a question.
Nope. Oh, hold on. Microphone. Right in front. No? All right.
Hello, is this working?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm really excited about the librarian as the sort of the data manager or like consultant of data management. And one of the things that it strikes me is like really, really needed for a lot of people I talk to who use data is this concept of anonymization and in particular de-anonymization. So for example, I was talking to a startup that is kind of surveillance in New York City, and they didn't understand, because I was a little bit worried about people, you know, the privacy. And they told me, oh, this is not going to be a problem because we're going to open source all the data. And I was like, no, that's not what you do. So there seems to be like a real lack of understanding of what it means to de-anonymize so-called anonymized data sources. I know this is just one of many, many different things, but one thing that's exciting to me about the idea of the librarian's role is that there's at least a person who's sort of like in charge of making sure that the data users are informed about this kind of issue.
Mm-hmm. And it's one where I think one way we can move forward, and I hope we move forward, is sort of in data classification. And that classification says, with this data, this is what can be used. I think what happens right now is we each sort of come up with our own classification scheme. We have a sense in our mind how the data can be used and reused by others, but we aren't able to convey it in a way that makes sense to everyone else. So if we can start to think about what are the 5 levels or 6 levels that reflect things such as the reuse ability, the anonymization of the material, the privacy, the protection that has to be there, then it ends, in the librarian's mind, it ends up being a metadata field. It ends up being a classification that we express as we index that data. But first we need that classification system for us to then apply it. And privacy for librarians is an issue that has always been on our mind, and there's many federal laws and state laws that require us to protect. If you're circulating a book, no one can know what books you're using. So for us, that's something that we've always been on the forefront of our mind, and I think we can apply to it. But in order for it to work, we need some standardization. And standards is another area where libraries have been at the forefront of creating national and international standards so we can communicate without having to pick up the phone to say, with this data set, you can do the following things. And so I think you're right to point out that there's classifications and other things that we can be applying to the data. Other questions or comments? For me or for Ben? Yes, sir. Hold on, we have a mic coming over to you.
Thank you. I'm an epidemiologist who is on the edge of retirement. And as I think back over my career, I've got massive data sets sitting on, all at Yale, sitting on either very large, now brittle tapes or floppy disks that nothing can read. So it's a very practical question about actually how do we physically store these data sets now, let alone make them available to everybody else, which we want to do. But it's just a very so far I've not found an answer to this problem.
Yeah, it is my favorite topic. Ben knows this is my favorite topic because digital preservation is an area that I'm trying to bring a lot of attention to. So the problem you're describing is a problem that we see in many different fields. So, for example, when the Beinecke Library receives the papers of a great writer, what we receive are boxes with papers, and then floppy disks, audio tapes, every kind of format you can imagine. So we've built up a digital forensics lab within the library to help us either emulate what was the operating system, the software, and the computer to try to get that data off, or to, if we're lucky enough, we actually get the parts and we reconstruct what that computer was. So there's actually groups on campus who are thinking about the digital preservation problem, which I think then connects very nicely to your question, which is I now have content, regardless of what the content is, a manuscript or if it's data, that needs to make it to the next generation. And how do we think about what activities we can do today to either catalog that it exists, it's in this format, to get from you as much knowledge as we can about the data, so that when you have retired and you're no longer on campus to help us, we have enough information to try to do our best job in stewarding that data to the next generation.
I'll be over next week.
All right. Maybe Len has comments on that as well.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think as we continue to evolve, we'll start to see technology that will kind of fill in some of the middle space there. So clearly preservation, curation are some very key things, but we need to start to build platforms that have the capability of ingesting high volumes of this data. across the institution. So we have a question of ingestion or the creation of the data. I think we have a question of storage, where we're going to store that, and not have people necessarily think about some of the typical things that you would want to do with data, like, you know, after a certain amount of time, maybe you want to move it to less expensive type storage devices. Maybe you want to archive it somewhere else, opposed to, you know, very expensive, fast-running disks. So we have the ingestion, the capture. We have overall management on an ongoing basis. I think we'll need to continue to work in that space. And then last piece is dissemination. And I think, you know, new technologies, that's going to give us the ability to actually take some of this curated data, some of this data that's being preserved, and make it available to the world. I think that space in between is also an important place where technology is going to play a big role.
Hi, Amy Justice. I'm from the medical school. One of the things that I think needs to be considered in this discussion that hasn't been mentioned yet is the whole role of the Human Investigations Committee, IRB, review. Because typically when one puts in a proposal, one is asked to say when they're going to destroy the data. And the feeling is that that's a protection for the patients who are involved in the study. So that comes in direct conflict with the goals that you were expressing, and not to mention the goals of many investigators who are very nervous about destroying data for all the reasons that you might think of. So I would just suggest that I think it's very important that IRB leadership and national leadership, really, in terms of how IRBs are set up and what they are expected to do, must participate in these discussions, or once again, the investigators are going to be put in between the two groups who are telling them very different things.
I don't know whether to respond or just say, I don't think that we've sorted out nationally where we are on this. We've got this real tension between IRB and HIPAA on the one side, privacy rights, as the first question alluded to, and the wish to make data available and to preserve data and to be able to reproduce results and so on. And to be honest, I'm not that confident we're going to end up in a good place. I mean, again, this isn't going to be I don't mean Yale end up in a good place. I mean the nation end up in a good place. I think that these tensions between privacy rights and access are real tensions. And in some sense, the history of the IRB, the history of the human subject law and practice in the US doesn't fill me with enormous confidence. Right? I mean, we've kind of groped towards procedures, and we kind of know how to do them, and then we all copy each other, and we're looking around, what should we do with this case? We go and see whatever Florida State did last week or last year, and so on. And I don't think any of us think, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm yet to meet somebody who thinks that we arrived at where we've arrived at with IRB rules by really sitting down and saying, how should this be? So we end up with over-regulation in some places, and possibly insufficient privacy regulation in others. So my worry here is we will see that historical process, that sort of accumulated regulation and law, without necessarily thinking it through abstractly and saying what we should do. I think we may see that occur again in this area. It's a frustration for many researchers, the tension between privacy and big data, and just what has to be private. If we apply the full IRB standards to some of these large data sets, then we end up doing what we all had to do this morning, which is sign a form saying it's okay to see our faces on TV, which my gut feeling says at some point in time is overregulation. Right? And at some point, some part of me says, are we really going to live in a society where we can't have a discussion and broadcast to Twitter without everyone having to fill in a form? That seems a pity. But I fear that this isn't going to end up in a great place. And by the way, it isn't just going to be a US debate. It's clear that the European law, particularly on the privacy side of things, may end up being what drives it, because it seems like the Europeans are being more restrictive on privacy. In some ways in a good way, right? Because there may be a lack of protection in some areas in the US. But I'm not confident. I mean, other people may have different views. I'm not confident this is going to end up in a good place at all.
I've often thought that if the American taxpayer knew how much money is spent in research for regulation, that they might have a very different view of the roles of IRBs. I chaired an IRB. I was a patient advocate before I went to medical school. I certainly am a believer in patients' rights to privacy. But much of what goes on in that discussion has to do with protecting the institution rather than protecting the individual. And it's really not about communication and information. It's really about protecting institutions.
I'll have something to say about all of this later on. But I wanted to ask a different question, which is something that to me that seems quite fundamental, and I haven't actually heard mentioned yet, which is the notion of cultural change. So with this emergence of the importance of data, it seems that there's a cost of time and energy associated with that. And it also speaks to a different kind of scholarship, of valuing scholarship in a different way. If you're expecting investigators to spend more time helping with the process of making data more usable, that sort of, in a sense, elevates data, the value of data within the realm of scholarship. And it needs to, clearly, if that's going to happen, there has to be give and take, so there has to be reward for that. I'm interested in what Yale thinks about that cultural shift and anything that's happening that reflects that.
I think it's a discussion for everybody. I mean, the reason it's difficult to say it, the sentence that caught my eye, or the phrase that caught my eye is quote, what Yale thinks. And, you know, there are, whatever, some number of thousand people at Yale, and my guess is you've got 1,000 different opinions on that. I think we're all struggling with this. It's interesting when we talk about these preservations of data issues that Susan mentioned, and you know, Susan's coming from the libraries. We've dealt with thinking that the preservation of information, we've dealt with the idea that that's important in the humanities for hundreds of years. Right? So our traditional view of the libraries is as storing written text and preserving written text, or in the case of our libraries, also storing ancient pre-manuscript texts on which are written in, what are they written on? They're clay. So these issues have been around for libraries on the history and humanities side for a very, very long time, also in art history. And so we're seeing them spread, we're seeing the same issues now spreading into the sciences. My gut feeling is that they're new issues in that the scope is much bigger now. But they're not really new issues, right? The idea that it's incredibly important to preserve information and to make information accessible to others, and with all the accompanying problems of privacy and regulation that go with it, I think that in some sense they're just the enlargement, because the data is much bigger, they're the enlargement of issues that we've been struggling with for a long time. I should let Susan, this is really Susan's area more than mine, but that my gut feeling is, again, there isn't what Yale thinks, but I think that this isn't quite as new an issue as we're claiming it is. It's the same issue writ much larger.
I think the perspective I'd add to that is I see an interesting tension within the humanities. As the humanities moves towards more data use, and the digital humanities are emerging, there's a natural tension within the humanities as to whether that is good research and whether it is okay to be a digital humanist and be accepted within your discipline, particularly when your output might not be a book or an article, but may take a very different form and may take a digital form. So there's an interesting tension on that side of it. And on the science and social science side, there's an interesting tension around the burden of caring for your data and sharing it with others. And so in many ways, I think we're all sort of coming together around a similar set of problems across all the disciplines. In a way, in the past, we had seen ourselves in very different places. That for the humanists, the end result was the book. And of course, you saved all of your copious notes of how you got to, and the footnotes identified everything very, very carefully. Now, in the digital humanities world, how does that look like? How do you reference? How do you point back to? So I think all the disciplines are struggling with this new world where you need to convey much more of the underpinnings and how you convey those underpinnings is sort of what we're struggling with, and then allowing replication or reuse. And so while I think we look at it right now as a burden, as soon as we're on the other side of the equation and benefit from reusing someone's data that has been really nicely documented, curated, preserved, and easily accessible, we'll start to see the value and start to internalize that value, and hopefully as institutions start to recognize that that's an important part of the dissemination process. I guess. Anyone?
So I'm a professor of sociology in the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and I teach a course on, or teaching a course right now on big data. And one of the things that I'm having a hard time with, and I'm wondering if the library or IT is going to help with, is just as important as the data are the methods we use to analyze them and that sort of thing. And I know that's not the focus of today, but I'm wondering, are there going to be more resources in terms of, when I think of my students, it would be nice to be able to send them to some sort of workshop instead of having to work with each student individually on different methods and things like that. So some sort of maybe intensive training or opportunities like that on whether it's like programming skills or working with databases. And
so as we've been imagining what the Center for Research Computing would look like, we've been thinking that one of the key things that they need to do is not only create community and bring people together that can share methods and techniques, but also provide some other services from the center, one of which would be something like the equivalent of application development or programming support. So someone who can work with your students and with you and with other researchers that you're working with to help develop your code. That's one important thing. And the other thing that we realize should be part of the mission of the center is to provide seminars, workshops, training, so that the infrastructure and the technology that we're providing to you, you'll be able to leverage it the best way possible. So the hope is that the center will be providing that for you.
I can comment here. Going right back to the CYC, the committee that changed the curriculum at Yale, which is more than a decade ago, we've been struggling with how to coordinate better our early entry-level statistics classes. And one of the struggles that was there then, and I hoped would have gone away by now, but hasn't, is that different fields feel very strongly have very strong disagreements about what are the basic packages you need to learn. So in my area of the social sciences, we end up teaching our students essentially boot camps on how to use Stata, and we just think it's just a waste of time for them to learn some of the packages that they might learn in the stats department. And the stats department has similarly strong views the other way. And these are strong and difficult social norms, because it's frankly true that in my field, if they don't know Stata, they can't get a job. It would be nice to have a common standard across the sciences, statistics, and the more quantitative social sciences, but we aren't there. I don't actually know what the solution to this is. I think some of it needs to be kind of boot camps in the relevant fields where you learn these things. I don't particularly think you need to have a whole semester's course on how to use Stata, for example. It's really just a couple of weeks to teach people how to be an RA and teach people how to the necessary techniques. Same with some of these programming skills. But there is this slight. It's unfortunate that we see this divergence of what are the right packages, because really what you're talking about, I think, is basic programming and the ability to use a basic statistics package.
I believe then we have wrapped up our session. Please join me in thanking Ben for coming here and sharing some time with us today.